In Kyoto, a grandmother had spent her whole life growing lilies for their flowers, never once touching what grew underground, until the war took everything else off the table, and she found herself digging up the lily bulbs instead. In the mountains outside Nagoya, a mother spent 3 days turning something most people wouldn't even touch, too bitter, too much work, into little cakes that kept her children fed for a week. 10 forgotten wartime meals Japanese grandmothers actually cooked to survive World War II. Dishes made from bark, leaves, and roots most people wouldn't look at twice today. Kept alive only in the memories of the women who had no other choice. Counting down from 10. 10. Burdock root porridge. Burdock root, water, a little rice, salt if there was any. That was dinner for entire winters in rural Nagano in the early 1940s, when a single sack of rice had to stretch across 6 mouths for a month. The root was scrubbed clean, sliced thin, and boiled down until it softened into the rice like it had always belonged there, the pot filling the house with the smell of damp earth and something faintly sweet underneath, like soil after rain. Nobody made this for guests. It was the porridge that meant your family would still be sitting at that table when spring came. 9. Bracken fern stew. On the outskirts of Hiroshima in 1944, when a single egg cost more than a day's wages, families went into the hills with baskets and came back with bracken fern. The fern couldn't be eaten straight from the ground. It had to soak for days just to pull the bitterness out, before it went into a pot with water, a little soy sauce if the jar wasn't empty, and whatever root vegetable hadn't gone soft yet, simmered until it finally gave up and turned tender. Even softened, it kept a trace of bitterness, the kind that reminded you it hadn't cost anything but time. It was a stew for people who understood that survival sometimes tastes like the forest floor itself. 8. Horse chestnut cakes. The mother from the mountains outside Nagoya, the one from the start of this list, spent 3 full days on a batch of horse chestnut cakes that would feed her children for 1 week. Horse chestnuts are toxic raw, so each batch had to be boiled and soaked over and over just to make them safe, then mashed into a paste and pressed into little cakes over low heat, with a scrape of rice flour if any was left in the tin. What came out was starchy and plain, faintly nutty, dense enough that it filled you slower than it should have. 3 days of labor for 1 week of dinners. That was the arithmetic she lived by. 7. Mulberry leaf rice. By 1943, with husbands and sons conscripted away from Yamanashi's farms, women were cooking for tables that used to be full and pantries that weren't. The mulberry trees on those farms had been planted for silkworms, not people. But when the rice harvest ran short, the leaves came down anyway, boiled soft, chopped fine, and folded through warm rice with a little salt. It tasted green and slightly grassy, with a faint sweetness that lingered on the back of the tongue. It was rice that remembered every part of the tree was worth something, even the part meant for someone else's silk. 6. Lily bulb stew. The grandmother in Kyoto had grown lilies for their flowers her whole life, never once touching what grew underground. When food ran short, she couldn't bring herself to waste a single bulb, so she peeled them apart petal by petal and simmered them with water and a little miso, if the jar still had any left, until they turned soft and slightly starchy, almost like potato. The taste was mild and a little sweet, with a texture that caught you off guard if you'd braced for something plain. It was a stew that turned a lifetime of growing beauty into something that could keep a family alive, and never once apologized for it. 5. Rice bran dumplings. What the rice mills threw away, a sharecropping family outside Fukuoka in 1945 kept and ate for weeks. Rice bran, water, a pinch of salt, sometimes a spoon of leftover flour if there was one, kneaded into a rough dough, rolled into small balls, and dropped into simmering water until they floated to the top. They tasted earthy and a little gritty, filling in a way that sat heavy and honest in the stomach. Everyone else called it waste. They couldn't afford to call anything waste. 4. Soybean leaf soup. Soybean leaves were meant for livestock, not dinner tables, but farming communities in Nagano ate them anyway through the leanest months of the mid-1940s, once the beans themselves had already been sold off or claimed by rationing. The leaves were washed, torn by hand, and simmered in water with miso and a sliver of whatever vegetable was left, until they wilted down into a broth that smelled faintly of the field and settled warm in the chest before it ever reached the stomach. It was soup made from what was supposed to go to the animals, eaten by people who chose to feed themselves first. 3. Okara patties. Tofu itself had gotten too expensive to eat whole by 1946, so a retired laborer near Osaka fed his family on what tofu left behind. Okara, the leftover pulp, pressed dry and mixed with a little flour and water into a rough batter, shaped into patties and fried in whatever fat was on hand, with green onion folded in if it grew nearby. Nutty and dense, slightly sweet at the browned edges, it turned a byproduct into something that could sit at the center of a plate. It cost pennies a day and asked for nothing more than pride to swallow. 2. Kudzu root dumplings. In the last years of the war, grandmothers across rural Kyushu went out to the hillsides and dug kudzu root by hand, back when a bag of real sugar might cost a week's wages, if you could find one at all. The root was ground into a starch, mixed with water into a paste, then shaped and steamed until it turned glossy and firm, tasting faintly sweet with a chew that caught you off guard, like something pulled out of a memory of dessert. It was dessert made without a single ingredient dessert usually requires, and somehow it still tasted like a small mercy. 1. Sweet potato vine soup. By the final year of the war, a mother in Kagoshima had already given up her potato patch's roots to someone else's ration quota, so she fed her children on what was left growing above ground, the vines. Chopped and boiled until tender, then folded into a simmering broth of water, miso, and a bone. If there happened to be one to spare, they turned soft and dark green, bitter at first bite before rounding out into something warm and almost meaty. It was the meal made from whatever remained after everything else had already been taken from you. Pick one of these, just one. Make it this week, sit at the table, not the couch, and set a place like someone is joining you, even if it's just you. Eat it slow, tell me in the comments. Was it the lily bulb stew or the mulberry leaf rice? A can of soup is easier than any of this, and it always will be. But easier was never the point. None of these were easy, and that's exactly what made them worth sitting down for.